Here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. On a farm, retirement isn't a date on the calendar. It's a transfer of authority, a transfer of responsibility, and usually a transfer of identity. And when families don't define it clearly, the handoff gets complicated and blurry. One generation feels pushed out, the next generation feels stuck, and the business gets caught in the middle, trying to run today's operation with yesterday's decision system. That's why today's episode is about Deck 2 of the Pathfinder Legacy Conversation card game, the deck I call the Make It Real deck, Handoff and Horizon. Because succession isn't just ownership someday, it's decisions today. Welcome back to the Pathfinder Legacy Podcast. Last episode, we talked about Deck 1, the Trailhead deck, starting the first conversation. Because if you can't start, you can't finish. Today, we're moving into Deck 2, Handoff and Horizon. And this is where families start shifting from we should talk about it to here's how we're actually going to do it. So quick note before we dive in. What I'm sharing is educational and practical, not legal, tax, or financial advice. Every family is unique. Bring in your attorney, CPA, lender, and other advisors when it's necessary. And if you're listening and thinking, we need this tool in our family, or you're an advisor and want to use it with clients, reach out to me at pathfinderlegacy.com. You can either email, call, or text me. I'll help you get the card game and figure out the best way to use it for your situation. All right, let's talk about Handoff and Horizon. So Deck 2 exists because most farm transitions don't break down over one big thing. They break down over 100 small, repeating questions like, who makes the call on when to sell grain or livestock this year? Who decides when to replace equipment? Who gets to talk to the landlord? Who carries the operating risk? And do they have the authority to manage it? What does retirement actually mean here? When does advice become interference? When does helping become control? So this deck helps families move from assumptions to agreements. And I want to give you 3 real-life scenarios that I have lived through and show exactly why this deck matters. So the first scenario, retirement that was never defined. A successor comes home or stays home, is fully committed. They're putting in the time. They're carrying the workload, raising their family. They're building what they can to get themselves started. But retirement from the owner generation keeps moving. It's that moving target. Dad says he wants to slow down, but still approves every purchase. Mom says, well, they'll transition soon, but harvest comes and still nothing changes. The successor starts to wonder, what am I doing here? Am I building a future or am I just renting a position? And the older generation starts to feel, well, what are the younger kids? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to push us out? Do they even respect what we've built or what we've worked for? Now, let me make this real with a story from my own family because I've watched how painful this can be. There was a time when my brother was living in a house 5 miles away in town, and my parents were still living in the main farmhouse. And the message kept being stated, in 5 years, we'll switch houses. Then you'll be on the farm. But the target kept getting moved further and further out. And there were reasons why. So number one, my dad said he didn't want to live in the house in town. And number two, when the date keeps moving, you can't help but wonder, is it because of comfort? Is it because of fear, uncertainty? Is it a way to keep control? All of this stress and worry that never gets talked about or brought to the table. And I'm not saying there were bad intentions. I'm saying that it was just real impact and fear. Because here's the reality for the next operator. You can't operate a farm business off of someday. You can't build your life. You can't build your family plan, your workforce plan, your lending plan, your equipment plan off maybe and eventually. That's not a transition. That's a waiting room that you're just stuck in for a long period of time. This is not about laziness. It's not about bad people. it's about undefined expectations and moving goalposts. And Deck 2 fixes that by helping families define retirement as a shared plan, not a vague promise. So, scenario 2, the steering wheel doesn't match the liability. This is a common one. The next generation is expected to run things, day-to-day operation, but they can't make decisions. They're told to increase profit, but they can't choose the inputs, the marketing strategies, or equipment upgrades. They're often told to take responsibility, but they never have authority to make those decisions. That creates a lot of resentment pretty darn fast. How long can the carrot be dangled out in front before more anger and resentment builds up? In Deck 2, we talk about aligning risk, responsibility, and decision rights so the person holding the steering wheel is actually allowed to steer it. Scenario 3, the lease transitions and landlord relationships. So here's another big one. Landlords don't like surprises. A lease is in mom and dad's name, but the successor is doing the work, and everyone assumes it'll transfer someday to the next person. But then someone hears something through the grapevine, or a neighbor says, I heard your ground might be changing hands. Then the landlord starts to wonder, what's going on? Are they stable? Who's actually farming the land? Who is the person that I need to be talking to? Who's accountable? Who's paying the bills and making the decisions? Dad or the son or daughter? So, Deck 2 gives families a way to plan lease transitions with clarification and communication before rumors do the damage. And if you take nothing else from that story, take this. A plan doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be clear enough that people can make decisions around it. That's why this first card matters so much, because it forces a definition that farms often avoid. Now, let's dig in. I'm going to feature 5 cards from the Handoff and Horizon deck and give you something like a say it like it is script so you can use it in your real life, day-to-day operation in your family situation. Because sometimes families don't need more concepts, they need words. How do we talk about this? All right, so here I have the deck. Now, the Deck 2, if you are following along on YouTube or wherever you're streaming the video, you will see each deck is got a different color to it. So it's easy to decipher which deck you're on. So this deck is more of a Handoff and Horizon deck is what I have it called. So the very first one is, what does retirement mean here? So when you say, the question is, when you say retirement, do you mean fewer hours, fewer decisions, or a full complete handoff? So really the question after that should be, define the word. Undefined retirement creates undefined conflict. So I would say something like this. If I was the successor saying to the senior generation, hey, Dad, I appreciate what you've built, and I also need to stop guessing. But when you say retirement, what does that mean to you? Does it mean you're stepping back from doing less labor or less management? Or are you eventually stepping away from making decisions? If we can define it and figure it out, I can support it and I can plan my life and my business around what your thoughts of retirement are. Okay, here's another idea that if you were the senior generation talking to the successor, you could say something like this. I'm not trying to hold you back. I'm trying to make a plan to operate on for myself. But let's talk about what I'm ready to hand off this year and what I'm not ready for yet. So you're not stuck in limbo, because we got to create that timeline. The next card, the advice versus authority line. So, how will advice be offered when the successor is the decision maker? And a question to ask, how will you handle this, is write a simple rule. Advice is valuable, but override is expensive. Now, this card hits close to home because I've seen it, how damaging second guessing can be in a family operation. I know of a situation where the son would make a decision and the dad would almost always come back afterwards and second guess him. And what made it even more frustrating was that he wouldn't call the son by his name. It was always son. He would say, "Well, son, don't you think you should be doing this?" Or, "Well, son, I could have told you that wouldn't work." And isn't that how it goes sometimes? Someone lets the next generation make the decision, but then they stand on the sidelines and critique every move. They show up after the weather situation, after the markets have made changes, after the crop is already made or not made, and they become the armchair quarterback on Monday morning. And in farming, sometimes Monday morning is harvest. This, folks, is my father in law. He'd show up in July or August, look at the field and say, "Well, son, that didn't turn out like you thought it would." And then he would say, "I could have told you that." Now, my husband Kirk jokes that someday he's going to put this on his dad's headstone. "Here lies Keith Olson. I could have told you that." And we laugh about it because sometimes humor is how we as farm families survive the truth. But underneath the humor is a real lesson. Because when the older generation constantly second guesses the next generation, the successor doesn't feel mentored. They feel managed. They feel like they are constantly being watched. "Oh, you get to carry the workload, but you're not allowed to learn through your own decisions." And here's another side of it. The senior generation may believe they're helping. They may believe they're protecting the farm. They may believe they're saving the next generation from a mistake they could see coming. But there's a difference between wisdom and control. There's a difference between offering their perspective and taking the steering wheel back. And that's exactly why this card is so important. The question is not, should the senior generation ever speak up? Of course they should. Their experience, wisdom, and history matters. It counts. The real question is, how do we offer advice in a way that builds the successor up instead of shrinking them and tearing them down? So here's a simple rule I like to use for this card. Do you want my input or do you want me to just listen? That one remark can change the whole entire tone of the conversation. So here is a sample script that the senior generation can say to the successor. "I see something I might do differently. Do you want my input or do you want me to just listen?" And I would direct them by their name and not say son, because that is just demeaning. So, "I see something I might do differently. Do you want my input or do you want me to just listen?" Now, if it's the successor saying to the senior generation, the son, who has a name, Kirk, could say, "I value your experience, but if I'm going to become the decision maker, I need to make decisions, learn from them, and not be second guessed after every outcome. I'm open to your advice, but I need it before the decision, not as criticism after the fact." I'm hearing the phrase, "I could have told you that," after decisions are already made. That doesn't help me improve. It makes me feel defeated. Could we have that conversation earlier so we have better expectations, or a after harvest review where we both talk through what worked and what didn't? Because here's the truth. The next generation cannot become confident operators if every decision is followed by a lecture. And the senior generation cannot feel respected if their wisdom is dismissed completely. The goal here is not silence. The goal is timing and the tone. Because I've seen lots of yelling in German families, clearly my heritage background, and I've seen timing of where clear authorization comes into place with who has got control and who has mentorship. Advice before the decision can be mentorship. Criticism after the decision can become resentment. This one card, the advice versus authority line, helps families decide where that line is before it becomes another harvest season fight. And that brings us right into the next card, because once you start talking about advice and authority, you have to answer another question. Who actually gets a say? Who gets a vote, and who needs to be informed but not in charge? That's where the next card comes in, and its title is Voice, Vote, or Veto. Where do we draw the line on decision making? Who has the voice, who has the vote, and who is kept informed? So, a side note on that question is not everyone needs a vote to be respected, but clear lanes reduce resentment. Now, this card doesn't just apply to farm management decisions, it also applies to one of the most emotional stages a family can walk through, when mom or dad's health starts to fail, or when there is one surviving parent and family members start questioning whether they are still capable of making decisions. I've seen this happen in families. Mom or dad is still living on their own. They are still paying their bills. They still know exactly what they want. But because their health is changing or because they are aging, suddenly other family members start pushing harder. One child might say, "Well, I think we need to sell this." And someone else says, "We need to start cleaning things out." Another says, "Mom wouldn't be making that decision anymore." And someone else might come along and say, "Dad doesn't understand what's going on." And sometimes what starts as concern turns into control. I've seen this in my professional career, and it stems from fear of losing control or jealousy that one sibling may get more than another. Sometimes it comes from exhaustion because one person is doing more of the caregiving than everybody else. And sometimes it comes from old sibling dynamics that have been around for 40 years. And sometimes, yes, it comes from people worrying about what they are going to get. But here's the line families need to remember: the surviving parent is still a person, not a project. They are not just in an estate to clean up. They are not a house to empty. They are not just a signature on a document. They are mom or dad. They still deserve their dignity, voice, and respect. And this is where voice, veto, or vote becomes so important, because not everyone has the same role. There is a difference between being concerned and being in charge. There's a difference between having an opinion and having legal authority. There's a difference between helping with caregiving and taking over someone's life before it is time. This is where families need to slow down and ask, who has a voice? Who has a vote? Who has legal authority through power of attorney, healthcare directives, trust documents, or estate documents? Who needs to be informed? And most importantly, what do mom or dad actually want while they are still capable of telling us? Because if those lanes are not clear, families start fighting before the funeral, before the estate, before the farm transfer, and oftentimes while mom and dad are sitting right there in the same room. And that does real damage to the family. Here's the thought process. If you have a voice, it means you get heard. If you have a vote, it means you are part of the decision. If you have a veto, which is rare and should be reserved only for high risk issues or legal authority. If you have an information box, means you are updated, but you're not in charge. You're only informed. And I would add one more category here, honor, which means we ask the parent what they want while they are still able to tell us. Because cleaning out estate items, selling personal property, changing living arrangements, managing farm assets, or deciding whether someone should move out of their home, those are not casual decisions. Those decisions carry change and frustration. It carries history and their complete identity. Someone might see a tractor as junk, and someone sees it as the last thing grandpa bought. One person might see the farmhouse as an asset. Another person sees it as a home. Someone sees the boxes in the basement as clutter, and someone else sees it as a lifetime of memories. So this card really helps families think and take a step back before they rush in and start sorting, selling, cleaning, deciding, or taking over completely. So here's a script of what I would say when family members all want a say. I would say something like, I know everyone has concerns and I want everyone to feel heard, but we need to separate having a voice from having authority. Let's figure out what mom and dad want, what documents are already in place, and who is legally responsible for which decisions. All right, here's another sample of when one parent is still living independently. Mom is still living on her own, and we need to respect that. We can talk about safety and support, but we should not talk about her like she is no longer capable unless there is a real reason and the right professionals are involved. All right, here's another idea of when one child is doing most of the caregiving. I realize that you are carrying more of the day to day responsibilities, and we appreciate that. But we still need clear lanes. What decisions are caregiving decisions? What decisions are business decisions? What decisions belong to mom or dad? And what decisions require the whole family to be informed? And another one, when estate items are being discussed too soon. This I've seen many times. So before we start cleaning things out or deciding what happens to personal property, let's ask, is this really the right time? Who has authority to be moving these items? And what would mom or dad want? We don't want to create anger and frustration by doing this now. Is this a priority to do now? This is where families stop fighting control and start building governance. And governance sounds like a fancy word, but it really means we know who decides what, we know who gets heard, we know who needs to be updated, and we're protecting the dignity of the people at the center of the decision. Because when health starts to fail, emotions rise. And when emotions rise, families need structure, not assumptions. That is why this card is so important. Voice, vote, or veto helps families decide the decision lanes before the crisis decides them. And once we understand who has a voice, who has the vote, and who needs to be informed, we can move into one of the areas where unclear authority creates a lot of tension. Managing equipment, managing personal property, business assets, because on a farm, stuff is rarely just stuff. The next card sample is equipment. What are we going to do with that equipment? Sell, gift, lease, or transfer? So, for major equipment, what method makes sense and what timeline feels fair? So, you can ask clarification. So, clarification beats assumptions. We need to separate sentimental value from business value. And this is a script, I would say something like this without getting a fight. Let's list the top 5 pieces of equipment that create the most value. And for each one, we need to decide, is it necessary to keep the business going or is it a sentimental item? And how will it be transferred? Sell, gift, lease to own, gradual transfer over time. One line that lowers defensiveness is, this isn't about taking something away. It's about making sure the business has what it needs and everyone is on the same page and understands the plan. The next card is lease transfers with no surprises. So if there are cash leases or crop share leases, who will be the tenant on paper? When does it change? And what terms need updating? The notes we always talk about is landlords value stability and communication. And you need to plan the handoff before the neighbors start talking and rumors do it for you. So a script that I would say, what do you call the landlord? You could say something like, "Hi, John. I want you to hear this directly from us, not through the rumor mill. We're working on a transition plan in our family, and we'd like to continue farming your ground long term. We want to introduce you to who will be handling the day-to-day work, and we want to make sure you are okay with this. Are you open for a quick meeting or phone call next week?" That's how you protect the trust you've built with your landlords and protect the lease at the same time. If you want to use Deck 2 right away, here's your 30-minute handoff map sprint. Set a timer for 30 minutes. Grab a notebook and pick a card. Step 1, define retirement. What does retirement mean here this year and what changes next year? Step 2, choose your top 10 decisions. Write the 10 decisions that drive the farm. So, for example, marketing, inputs, expenses. What are you adding into the farm to make it grow? Hiring for labor, leases, cash rent, share crop leases, land improvements, debt. What debt is out there? What insurance do we have? And livestock purchases. So for each decision, you need to put a label on it. Who has a voice? Who has a vote? And who only gets information? Step 3, take 10 minutes and create one transfer target. So pick one of the following and write a quick first draft for. So for example, equipment, one piece of equipment. What is our transfer plan for that one piece of equipment? Or maybe it's a lease transition on a cash rent lease. What's the transition plan for that? Or you could pick a management area, piece of the farm, who gets to make that decision on what the cropping plan is for that specific section, or what are we going to breed the cows to this year? Then you need to do this most important part. Schedule the next conversation before you leave the table. If you complete this sprint, you're already light years ahead of what most families, because you turned we should into we did. So the next episode, we'll keep going with deck 2, the Handoff and Horizon. For the second half of this deck, we're going to talk about the topics families avoid the most: money, roles, what hat they're wearing, setting boundaries, and contingency planning. Because you don't plan succession for the good years, you plan it for the hard years. As we wrap up today, here's what I want you to remember. You can't change the past. You can't control the markets. And you can't undo the hard times, but you can change what happens next by changing the conversation and making the handoff clear. Today, we talked about deck 2, Handoff and Horizon, and how important it is to define retirement, decision-making authority, advice versus control, equipment transfers, lease transitions, and what it really means to move from assumptions to agreements. And now I don't want you to just listen and move on. I want you to take one step. Go to pathfinderlegacy.com and look for episode 48, the 30-minute handoff map sprint resource. It's a printable worksheet you can use at the kitchen table to start defining what retirement means, who makes which decisions, and what one transfer target needs attention first. You don't have to solve the whole succession plan in one meeting. You just need to take the next step. And if you're ready to purchase the Pathfinder Legacy Conversation card game, or you want help using it with your family or your clients, reach out to me at pathfinderlegacy.com. You can either email, call, or text me. And next time on the Pathfinder Legacy podcast, we're going to keep going with deck 2, Handoff and Horizon, and talk about the topics families avoid the most: money, role clarity, boundaries, risk, contingency planning, and the hard what if conversations that could protect both the farm and the family. Because avoided conversations don't disappear. They usually come back as conflict, confusion, or crisis. At the end of the day, the legacy isn't just land, equipment, genetics, leases, or a business plan. It's people. It's relationships. It's the story you're writing together. Thanks for joining me on the Pathfinder Legacy podcast. If this episode made you think about your own farm's future, consider sharing it with a family member or a friend who could use the help. Sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones that matter the most. Until next time, I'll see you between the ditches.
Thanks for listening to the Pathfinder Legacy podcast, where your future is our focus. Be sure to subscribe, follow us on social media, and visit us at pathfinderlegacy.com to start building your transition plan today.